In October of 1601, a wealthy nobleman sat at a royal banquet in Prague, squirming in pure agony. His bladder was completely full, but custom dictated that leaving the dinner table before the baron was unforgivably rude. So he just sat there, drinking wine, smiling politely, and holding it in for 6 straight hours. By the time he returned home, his body was in shock. 11 days later, he was dead. But here's the crazy part. That petty aristocratic etiquette blunder was actually the single greatest moment in the history of astronomy. Because without his sudden death, human beings might still believe the sun revolves around the Earth. To understand how an exploded bladder unlocked the secrets of the cosmos, we have to go back 30 years. Meet Tycho Brahe, the richest and weirdest arrogant scientist in 16th century Europe. As a college student, Tycho got into a furious late-night duel with another student. They were not fighting over a woman or honor, but over a complex mathematical formula. Tycho got part of his nose sliced off in the dark, so he spent the rest of his life wearing a custom nose piece made of solid brass and silver. Later in life, he bought a pet elk that famously died after drinking too much beer at a party and falling down the stairs. Despite his chaotic personal life, Tycho had one massive advantage over every other thinker of his time. He was obscenely wealthy. The King of Denmark gave him his own private island, where Tycho built a gigantic castle called Uraniborg. It was essentially a 16th century NASA base, complete with underground observatories, printing presses, and massive brass protractors. For 25 years before telescopes were invented, Tycho spent every clear night staring at the stars, logging the most precise astronomical measurements in human history. His goal was to prove his own strange theory that planets orbited the sun, but the sun orbited the Earth. He was totally wrong, but his treasure trove of accurate numbers was priceless. Enter candidate number 2, Johannes Kepler. If Tycho was a flamboyant millionaire with a brass nose, Kepler was his polar opposite. Kepler was a broke, sickly math teacher with terrible eyesight, crippled hands, and a family that constantly got accused of witchcraft. To survive, he wrote horoscopes for rich people who wanted to know if their business ventures would succeed based on the stars. But secretly, Kepler was a mathematical genius who was obsessed with figuring out the mind of God through geometry. He believed that the planetary orbits were nested inside perfect geometric solids. He was completely wrong about that too, but he knew he needed real scientific data to prove his theories. In 1600, Kepler moved to Prague to become Tycho's assistant. It was a match made in scientific hell. Tycho was paranoid and terrified that this smart young assistant would steal his life work and outshine him. So instead of giving Kepler full access to his vault of stellar measurements, Tycho gave him one tiny, agonizing task. He told Kepler to solve the orbit of Mars. Mars was notorious because its movement in the sky made no sense according to traditional circular models. Tycho thought this difficult puzzle would keep Kepler occupied for years without giving away his master dataset. Bragging to his friends, Kepler boasted that he would solve Mars in 8 days. 8 days turned into 8 painful years. Kepler calculated the numbers thousands of times by hand, filling endless pages with geometry. Every single model failed, because everyone in 1600 believed one sacred rule: heavenly bodies must move in perfect circles. Then came the banquet tragedy from our opening story. Tycho suddenly died, leaving his mountain of data locked in chests. Tycho's greedy relatives immediately swooped in to sell the notebooks for gold. But Kepler knew those numbers were the key to unlocking the universe. In an act of pure scientific desperation, Kepler literally stole the notebooks right under the noses of Tycho's heirs before they could sell them. With Tycho's stolen treasure, Kepler noticed something shocking. The orbit of Mars missed being a perfect circle by just 8 arc minutes, a microscopic fraction of a degree. Most people would have ignored that tiny error and claimed victory, but Kepler trusted Tycho's precision. He dropped the ancient assumption of perfect circles and tried a stretched-out oval shape called an ellipse. Boom! Everything matched perfectly. Kepler had just proven that planets travel in stretched ovals, speeding up when near the sun. If you are enjoying this chaotic historical heist, leave a quick like and subscribe to help us keep bringing these stories to life. Now, one final question remained. Why? Kepler figured out how the planets moved, but he had no idea what physical force was pushing them through space. He guessed it might be magnetic rays shooting from the sun, but he could not prove it mathematically. Kepler died penniless on a muddy road, leaving behind a revolution that was only half finished. For 50 years, his brilliant laws sat in books, largely ignored by mainstream scholars who still preferred neat circular orbits. The scientific world was stuck once again. It took a third eccentric oddball, born in England in 1643, to finally connect the dots and complete the giant puzzle that Tycho and Kepler started. His name was Isaac Newton. If you thought Tycho and Kepler were weird, Newton was on a whole different level. He was a deeply paranoid hermit who hated criticism, held grudges for decades, and routinely poked himself in the eye with blunt needles to see how light worked. In 1684, the famous astronomer Edmund Halley visited Newton at Cambridge and asked a casual question: if gravity pulled planets toward the sun, what shape would their orbit be? Newton instantly replied, an ellipse. Halley was stunned and asked for his mathematical calculations. Newton searched through his messy piles of papers, could not find them, and promised to rewrite them. To fulfill that promise, Newton locked himself in his room for 18 straight months. He did not just rewrite his old notes, he invented an entirely new branch of mathematics called calculus, framed 3 universal laws of motion, and proved that gravity is the invisible thread pulling apples from trees and keeping planets in orbit around the sun. Newton published all of this in a masterpiece that fundamentally redefined science forever. He proved that Kepler's ellipses were not an accident. They were the mathematical consequence of gravity pulling mass across space. The grand puzzle was finally solved, spanning 3 men, 3 generations, and hundreds of chaotic years. Look at how insane this trajectory really was. Modern astronomy was not created by a neat team of pristine geniuses working in a spotless laboratory. It was built by a party-loving nobleman with a fake nose and a drunk elk, a broke, bad-sighted teacher who stole secret stellar data, and an antisocial hermit who invented calculus on a dare because he misplaced his notes. None of these 3 men actually set out to revolutionize our understanding of space. They were just obsessed with their own strange personal questions, squabbling over data and bumping into history along the way. Yet together they unlocked the entire cosmos. This bizarre historical chain reaction reveals something profound about human progress that is still true today. We like to think that breakthrough ideas happen in tidy, predictable moments of pure genius. But real life is chaotic, messy, and full of ridiculous accidents. The greatest discoveries in human history often happen when flawed people are willing to pay attention to tiny details that everyone else ignores, like 8 arc minutes of error or a falling apple. Progress rarely comes from having all the right answers from the start. It comes from being curious enough to look at a mess, question ancient assumptions, and embrace the wild unpredictability of reality. So the next time you look up at the night sky, remember that our cosmic knowledge exists because one man was too polite to go to the bathroom. Humanity owes its entire modern worldview to a fake nose, a stolen notebook, and a misplaced piece of math homework. History is never predictable, but it sure is hilarious. What wild historical story do you want us to cover next? Let us know in the comments below, hit that subscribe button to join our curious community, and stay tuned for another wild ride through human history next week.